My name is Kristian, and I am a youth worker here in Carlisle, and welcome to the Carlisle Youth Collective's YouTube channel. That poor kid in the in the blooper, I just feel like that at the moment. If I'm being honest, I feel like right now we're doing a lot of things over and over again, and it feels a lot like it's the same thing that's happening again and again. Nothing's going to plan. Nothing's the way it used to be. Things are hard, and being a youth worker is not the easiest at the moment. We miss you guys. We miss hanging out around the table, shooting pool, eating a donut, all those kind of things. Sort of what we live for. But instead, we're doing a lot of virtual stuff, which is fine, but it's just not the same, is it? And so it all feels a little bit. Sometimes it feels a little meaningless. I don't know if that responds to the way that you feel as well, and that's just tough. And if I'm being honest, I'm kind of tired, and I'm feeling a little sort of like I just don't know. I'm feeling a little bit like, if it continues like this for a long time, where there's no control over what's happening, it's just gonna be a strange time for a while, and I don't know what to do about that. There's this guy in the Bible called Solomon. He wrote this book, like a sub book inside the Bible, if that makes sense, and he starts that book out saying, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And that, if I'm being honest like that, I'm responding to how he feels at the moment. And what was interesting about him was that he was a king, so he was super wealthy, and so he just sort of was trying everything. He was sort of like, wisdom is meaningless, like being the smartest, wisest person in the land. So he'd spent tons of time just like becoming super clever and super wise, and then just realized that didn't bring any true meaning in his life. And then he sort of spent time just drinking everything, sleeping with everyone, just doing whatever he wanted to do that felt good. And he's like, oh, that doesn't bring any meaning either. And then he sort of spent time just like working his butt off and just being a workaholic, and sort of like, and realized that just doesn't bring any meaning either. And he also like looked around. He's the king. He had tons of land, tons of property, lots of people around him, and all that wealth was meaningless as well. And so if he feels that way when he's going out of his way and doing all that stuff on purpose, I think it's okay for us to sometimes throw our arms in the air and our hands in the air and say that a lot of this stuff just feels kind of difficult and hard at the moment. And we spent these last few episodes talking about how and what to build our lives on. Remember when Ruth Younger and Sophie were down by the Eden River trying to walk on water, and there'll be a link up here for that video if you haven't seen it yet. Or when Sophie made me eat a Snickers as I was taking those pictures, and she wanted to remind ourselves that we needed to
treat yourself. Treat yourself.
This is insane.
You're gonna treat yourself. Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
I'm gonna treat myself.
Treat yourself.
Or Brian talked about when we sort of, if we were to build a house, like where would you build it? Would you build it on sand, or would you build it on like a solid foundation? And Ruth Scholes last week, she was sort of saying, like, we spend a ton of time on social media, and that there's nothing inherently wrong with that, of course, but it's like, what if we spent a little bit of our time on other things? What kind of tried to challenge us a little bit about some of our time usage. And I don't know where you are with God and Jesus and faith. But we were just sort of trying to share from our own personal perspectives how we sort of want to see our lives built on something bigger than ourselves. That if we're sort of just focusing on what we want and how we feel, especially during these sort of really weird times, and this ends up just feeling kind of meaningless and empty. It feels like we're not in control of our lives. It feels like nothing we do really works. And so it's a sort of, our hope has been to sort of just encourage you to sort of lift your eyes up a little bit, maybe. And just like Peter, remember when we're talking about Peter, or Ruth Younger, and then we're talking about Peter and how he sort of looked at Jesus, and then that gave him the courage to try to walk on water. And that was because he stopped looking at everyone else, and as long as he sort of was able to not be distracted, then he was walking. But then what happens when he sees the waves and he sees all the stuff crashing around him? That's when he starts sinking. So I know that for some of you, Jesus and God and that stuff isn't exactly where you're at, and that's okay. We still love you, we still want to hang out with you, and we still all want all these things. But I think for some of us at the same time, when we, just like Peter did, when we look to Jesus, he actually gives us some promises, and he says this in another part of the Bible. He says, I leave you peace. My peace I give you. I do not give it to you as the world does. So don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't be afraid. And I think that's really extra true in this situation, and maybe something that a lot of us need to hear, is that we need peace, and we don't feel peace. And when we try to dive into pleasure, or doing what we feel like, or working our butts off, or whatever it is, when we try to find peace and all that kind of stuff in there, we're just not going to find it. And I think that that's a challenge. And I think that when we look outside of ourselves, that's when we really get to that point of realizing that, there is true and real peace won't be found there. And the only place that I've found that is with Jesus. This is the last Friday of this first part of the autumn term, and I'm so excited about half term coming up next week, because I'm drained, I'm tired, and I'm guessing that a lot of you are probably feeling similarly. And when I'm feeling like this, all I want to do is just like shut down and just not do anything, not think about anything, maybe just like watch 10 hours of Netflix and then go to bed. But when I do that, life just sort of happens to me, and that's sort of worse. You just sort of I go through life and just things happen to me, rather than like when Peter, he did something, right? He looked up and he walked towards Jesus. He took a little bit of this, took a step of faith, he took a step of trusting. But then things were different. They weren't just happening to him like they were with the other disciples who were just scared at the bottom of the boat. And it's the same, like when you're building a house, you have to look for a solid place to build it. You can't just like, oh, this is a nice beach, I'm going to build a house here. Of course, it's just going to disappear the first time you get to a stormy or a storm comes. So we actually have to, I know it's hard, and I feel the same way. It takes a little bit of effort, actually. We have to be sort of proactive, because if not, life is just going to happen to us. We have to look up from the mess that's happening at the moment. Some of it is completely outside of our control. A lot of it probably is. Like, we don't get to decide who we sit with at school or at work. We don't get to decide the schedules. We don't get to decide hardly anything anymore. But I think what we need to do then is to have some sort of reminder, because it's so easy to just get into this sort of mindless routine. And so we've got a bunch of these little rubber bands, and if you DM us, if you send us an email, if you hit us up on Insta or comment below, we'll mail one out to you. And what I'm gonna do, and what I hope you'll join me in doing, is just keeping it on your hand, and every time, or around your wrist rather, and every time you sort of see it, and when I see it around my wrist, I'm just gonna use that as a reminder to sort of okay, am I just letting life happen, or am I being a little bit more proactive? Am I doing what Peter did? Am I doing what a wise house builder does? Am I building my life on something that matters? Am I looking to something bigger than myself? For me, that's looking to Jesus. And for all of us, regardless of where we are, I think having and being outside of ourselves, or a focus outside of ourselves, is so important. Because if our only focus is ourselves, then we so quickly just feel like we're being tossed back and forth by the waves, right? Instead of standing on some solid ground. So hit us up, let us know how you're doing, DM us, and we'll mail you out a rubber band. You can probably just steal one out of the kitchen drawer as well, of course, but we'll happily send you one. Or next time you see us in person, we'll have some with us. So anyways, yeah, we just hope you have a fantastic half-term break. Hope you have a great time off. Hope you tend to spend some time resting. Hope you spend some time treating yourself. And my wall thing just fell down, so I guess that's a good place to stop. We won't be here next week, but we'll be back when school starts back up. All right, see you guys.